Little girl said, "Nobody wanted my mom with 9 kids." The rancher said, "Good. I want all of you." The December wind of 1886 Wyoming howled through the broken boards of the Pine Ridge train depot, rattling the frostbitten windows and slipping icy fingers beneath the thin clothing of anyone unlucky enough to stand outside long. Martha Ellison, 35, weary beyond her years, tightened her faded gray shawl around her shoulders. The fabric was frayed from months of travel and too many nights doubling as a blanket for whichever child needed it most. Her boots, once her husband's gift, were cracked at the soles. Snow seeped through. But she didn't complain. Mothers didn't have the luxury of collapsing. Behind her huddled her 9 children, pressed together for warmth like a row of trembling sparrows. Eli, the eldest at 15, trying to look strong though his hands shook. Jonah and Samuel, the 14-year-old twins, quieter than usual. Lucy, age 11, comforting 6-year-old Timothy. Ruth, 10, shivering despite her knitted mittens. Hannah, 12, clutching a tattered Bible. And little Clara, 8, perched closest to Martha, her small hand gripping her mother's skirt. Their breaths fogged the air in pale clouds as the train pulled away, wheels screeching before fading into the white wilderness. That train had been their last hope for a warmer town, a paying job, or a stranger willing to take them in. Instead, the conductor had apologized, shaking his head as he informed Martha the next stop held no vacancies for workers and no waiting relatives. "We're sorry, ma'am. Town's full. Winter's hitting hard." And just like that, they were stuck. Martha gathered her children closer to her. "All right now," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "We'll wait until the storm settles. The Lord hasn't left us." But inside, fear dug deep. Their farm in Missouri was gone. Her husband, Henry, had been gone even longer. And every letter begging for work or shelter had been answered with the same cold sentiment. "Too many children. Too much burden. We can't take you in." Martha had tried to shield the children from these rejections. She had swallowed humiliation until her throat burned from holding back tears. But children notice everything. Clara looked up at her now, cheeks red from windburn, eyes too wise for 8 years. "Mama?" she whispered. "Yes, baby?" The girl's voice cracked like thin ice. "Nobody wanted my mom with 9 kids." The words were not spoken in anger, just quiet truth, born from too many slammed doors and pitying stares. Martha's heart clenched. She pulled Clara into her side, smoothing her hair. "That doesn't mean God doesn't want us," Martha whispered. "He sees us. He knows what we need." "But what if nobody else does?" Clara asked, tears turning to frost at the corners of her lashes. Before Martha could answer, the depot door creaked open, banging against its hinges as a gust of wind pushed through. Martha turned, expecting another traveler, another pair of eyes sliding past them. But instead she saw a man who did not look away. Tall, easily over 6 feet. Broad-shouldered. Weather-bronzed skin. A thick coat dusted with trail dirt. Boots worn down by miles of land he'd clearly worked himself. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man used to open spaces and hard labor. His hat shielded most of his face, but Martha caught the eyes, sharp blue, the kind that assessed a situation in seconds yet held no judgment. This was Luke McAllister, though she didn't know his name yet. He paused halfway inside, gaze sweeping over the sight of a woman and 9 exhausted children stranded in a half-broken depot. He didn't dismiss them. He didn't sigh. He didn't mutter, "Not my business." He simply watched, thought, considered. Eli tried to stand straighter, stepping slightly in front of his mother. Martha put a hand on his arm in reassurance. Luke's voice, when he finally spoke, was deep and gentle. "You folks stranded?" Martha inhaled, embarrassed but honest. "Only until I find work. Or shelter." Luke nodded, as if weighing more than her words, perhaps weighing her spirit, the children's resilience, the hopeless situation laid bare before him. Then Clara tugged on Martha's skirt again and whispered, not as quietly as she thought. "Mama, he's the only one who stopped to ask." Luke seemed to hear. He stepped forward. Martha stiffened, unsure whether to expect judgment or sympathy. Instead he looked at Clara first, then at every child, then back to Martha. Something warm flickered in his expression, something like recognition, or calling. The snow outside raged on, but in that moment, something in the air shifted. Martha didn't know it yet, but the Lord had just opened the door she'd prayed for. Luke McAllister had stopped at the Pine Ridge Depot only to collect a shipment of winter feed, nothing more. His ranch, the Double M, sat 6 miles south, tucked between 2 ridgelines where the wind scraped across the plains like a living thing. Winters were brutal and every hour mattered. But when he stepped into the depot and saw 10 figures huddled against the far wall, he forgot all about feed time or the storm brewing outside. The widow looked exhausted, shoulders hunched not in defeat but in protection. Her shawl barely held together, her eyes swollen from fatigue yet clear with determination. Her 9 children stayed close to her, each of them showing signs of hard travel and harder months. Luke had seen stray calves, orphaned pups, even abandoned travelers during storms, but never a sight that pulled at him quite like this. A mother standing between her children and the world with nothing left but her faith. He stepped forward slowly so he wouldn't startle them. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Looks like the cold's biting hard today." Martha straightened, smoothing her skirt though she had nothing to prove. "It is, sir, but we'll manage." Luke eyed the thinness of their clothes, the purple tint on several fingers, the chapped lips of the little ones. No one should have to manage in weather like this. Eli stepped protectively in front of his mother, posture stiff. "We ain't beggin', mister." Luke raised a hand, palms open. "No one said you were." He respected Eli immediately. A boy trying too hard to fill a man's shoes. Luke knew that burden. His own father had died when he was 14. Then Luke's gaze drifted to Clara, the girl who had spoken earlier. She peered up at him with a mix of hope and suspicion. "How old are you, little one?" he asked gently. 8, she replied. "Almost 9. Mama says I'm her chatterbox, but I only talk when I have something important." Luke smiled faintly. "Was what you said earlier important?" Clara nodded. Her small hands twisted in her skirt. "Nobody wanted my mom with 9 kids." The depot went quiet. Martha's face flushed crimson. "Clara. Hush now, sweetheart." Luke glanced at Martha, then knelt so he was eye level with Clara. "Well," he said softly, "sometimes folks overlook the best blessings because they're afraid they might have to work for them." Clara blinked. "Are we blessings?" Luke's heart squeezed unexpectedly. "More than you know." Martha's breath caught, her expression tightening with something near disbelief. Luke stood again and turned toward her. "If you don't mind me asking," he said, "where were you headed?" "Anywhere with work," Martha replied. "I'm strong and so are my older children. I can wash, cook, mend, whatever's needed." "And your husband?" Luke asked gently. "Gone," Martha said simply. "A mining accident last spring." Luke removed his hat. "I'm real sorry." "Thank you," she murmured. "But we're learning to manage." "Seems to me you've been doing more than managing," Luke said. "You've kept 9 young uns alive and together. That takes grit." Martha's eyes softened, surprised by the respect in his voice rather than pity. Outside, the wind slammed against the depot again. Snow howled through the cracks like a warning that time was running short. Luke inhaled deeply. "Ma'am? Martha, it ain't safe to stay here tonight." "I know," she admitted, voice small. "But we have nowhere else to go. Every boarding house turned us away." Luke's jaw tightened, not from anger at her, but anger at a world that would turn away a family simply because it wasn't convenient. Clara suddenly stepped forward and tugged Luke's coat sleeve again, as boldly as she had earlier. "What about you, mister?" she asked. "Do you want us?" Luke studied her. Studied Martha. Studied all 9 children. He'd lived alone for years. Too many quiet nights. Too much space. Too much silence echoing in hallways built for a family he'd never had. Maybe this was the Lord's answer to prayers he'd stopped praying. Then he spoke the words that changed everything. "Good," he said slowly. "Because I want all of you." Martha's lips parted in shock. The twins stared. Ruth gasped softly. Even Eli's stern facade cracked. "You want us?" Martha whispered. Luke nodded once. "I've got room. More than enough. And the Lord puts people in our path for a reason. If you'll trust me, I'll take you all to the Double M Ranch for shelter, warm beds, food, safety. No strings. Just let me help." Martha swallowed hard, torn between gratitude and fear of burdening another man. "Sir, I don't know how we can repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Luke said. "Just let your kids be kids again. And let yourself breathe." Martha's eyes shimmered. Then the storm outside roared louder, as if confirming the urgency of his offer. Luke extended a hand. Not to Martha first, but to Clara. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his. "Mama," Clara whispered, "God sent him." And Martha, feeling the truth of it settle warm in her spirit, finally nodded. "All right, Mr. McAllister. We'll go with you." Luke tipped his hat. "Then let's get your family home." The snow eased as Luke McAllister led the Ellison family toward his wagon. The horses, 2 sturdy bays named Ranger and Maple, stamped their hooves impatiently, steam drifting from their nostrils as if even they sensed the urgency of the moment. Luke lifted the younger children into the wagon first, wrapping them in thick wool blankets he normally used for winter cattle drives. Martha stood back, unsure whether to help or keep her hands to herself. "You can climb in too," Luke said gently. "No need to freeze your toes off for pride's sake." Martha flushed, embarrassed but grateful. Yes of course." He offered his hand. She hesitated only a second before taking it. Her hand was small and cold, rough from labor but steady. Luke felt a strange jolt at the contact. A wordless understanding, perhaps, or something he wasn't ready to name. Eli helped hoist the twins and Ruth into the wagon. Hannah held little Timothy on her lap. Clara nestled beside Martha, wrapped snug as a kitten. Once everyone was settled, Luke swung up to the driver's seat. "Hold tight," he called. "It's a bumpy ride." The road to the Double M. The wagon rattled over frozen ruts and snow-packed ground as they left the depot behind. The sky stretched endlessly above them, soft gray with streaks of lavender as dusk settled like a blanket over the plains. Clara peeked out between the blankets. "Mama, look. So big. Bigger than Missouri." Martha managed a smile. "Wyoming has skies that never end." Luke heard and added, "And land that'll test you. Winters are fierce, summers hot as a stovetop. But she's honest land. Gives back what you put in." The children listened with round eyes. To them, land meant hope, something solid after months of drifting. Eli cleared his throat. "Mr. McAllister, how far's your ranch?" "About 6 miles, Luke answered. "We'll be home before the moon's up." The word home stirred something in Martha's chest, something fragile, almost frightening. She watched Luke's profile as he guided the reins, strong lines softened by gentleness, jaw set with purpose. A man who worked hard, lived simply and kept his promises. In the silence of the ride, Martha whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, give me wisdom, and guard my children's hearts." First glimpse of a future. When they reached the ridge, the Double M Ranch finally came into view. A wide valley opened below them, dusted in snow but undeniably alive. A cluster of buildings stood strong against the wind. The main ranch house, 2 stories, warm lamplight glowing through frosted windows. The barn, sturdy and red, smoke rising from a chimney at its side. A long bunkhouse for ranch hands. Fenced pastures stretching into the distance. Clara gasped. "Mama, it's beautiful." Luke heard the awe in her voice but didn't turn around. He didn't want to frighten her with the emotion tightening in his throat. "I try to keep the place decent," he said quietly. Martha couldn't help it. She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. McAllister, you built all this?" "Most of it," he answered. "My pa started it. I took over after he passed." Hannah whispered, "It looks safe." Safe. A word Martha had not felt in a long time. Meeting the foreman. The wagon rolled into the yard, crunching over packed snow. The barn door swung open and Jed Carter, Luke's longtime foreman, stepped out wiping his hands on a rag. Jed was in his 50s, sturdy as an oak stump and twice as stubborn. He squinted into the dim light, then froze as he took in the sight of the wagon overflowing with children. "Boss," he said slowly, "did the good Lord turn the depot into a schoolhouse and send it home with you?" Luke climbed down. "Evenin', Jed." Jed pointed at the children. "Those yours?" Luke snorted. "No." Jed looked at Martha next. "They hers?" "Yes," Luke answered. Jed stared. "9?" "9," Luke confirmed. Jed blinked once, twice. "And you brought them here?" Luke folded his arms. "They needed shelter. And we've got plenty." Jed glanced at the children. Ruth waved shyly. Timothy sneezed. Samuel and Jonah grinned with identical mischief. Clara peeked from behind Martha like a curious sparrow. Jed's stern face softened. "Well, they look half froze. Let's get them inside." Inside the ranch house. The moment Martha stepped into the ranch house, she felt warmth wash over her, wood heat, lamplight, and the faint smell of cornbread. The walls were lined with shelves of canned goods, dried herbs, and carefully mended quilts. Not fancy but cared for. Clara whispered, "It's cozy." Luke began unbuttoning his coat. "Kitchen's through there if you want tea." Jed helped the boys with their boots, they're soaked. Eli looked surprised. "You want us inside your house?" "This is your house tonight," Luke said firmly. The children exchanged glances, unbelieving, relieved, overwhelmed. Martha sank onto a wooden bench by the fire. Her bones ached, but the peace in her heart was louder. Luke handed her a mug of hot tea. "Drink," he said. You look about ready to drop. She cupped it with two shaking hands. Mr. McAllister. I don't know how to thank you. Truly. Luke shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Just rest. The Lord brought you here, that's enough. Their eyes met and neither looked away. A sense of something new. As the younger children fell asleep near the hearth, Clara crawled onto Martha's lap. Mama, she whispered. Is this home now? Martha looked toward Luke, who was helping Eli hang wet coats by the fire. She didn't know what tomorrow held. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt the faint glow of something like belonging. She wrapped an arm around Clara. Baby, she murmured, I think the Lord just gave us a place to breathe. And in the quiet warmth of the ranch house, the Ellison family experienced the first night of peace they'd had in a long, aching year. Morning came early at the Double M Ranch. A soft gray light crept over the snowy ridgelines, revealing frost on fence posts and smoke drifting lazily from the ranch house chimney. For a brief, precious moment, the world felt peaceful. But peace rarely lasted long on a ranch, especially now that 9 children were part of it. Chaos before breakfast. Martha awoke to the sound of something crashing, followed by Eli's voice. Timothy, I told you not to touch that. She rushed into the kitchen, still tying her apron. The scene before her nearly stopped her heart. 6-year-old Timothy stood beside a bucket of spilled milk, face ghost pale, socks soaked. I just wanted to help, he whimpered. Martha knelt immediately and cupped his cheeks. Oh, sweetheart. Helping isn't wrong. We just need to learn how. Luke stepped into the kitchen just then, boots soft against the wooden floor. He took in the spilled milk, the flustered children, the overwhelmed mother. Accidents happen, he said calmly, taking the bucket from Timothy's trembling hands. Nothing we can't fix. Martha shot him an apologetic look. I'm so sorry, Mr. McAllister. The children. Our children, Luke replied simply. And they're welcome here. Something warm pressed against Martha's ribs at that, a strange mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Jed learns the hard way. When Martha and the children went outside to help with chores, Jed Carter stood waiting, arms crossed, grumbling under his breath. Boss, he muttered to Luke as the family approached, you sure about this? A ranch ain't no playground. Luke raised a brow. You planning on helping or complaining? Jed swore he wasn't complaining, but his face said otherwise. The older boys, Eli, Jonah, and Samuel, quickly proved themselves. They followed instructions, lifted feed sacks, and listened more than Jed expected. But the younger ones? Well, they were another story entirely. Ruth accidentally let the chickens out. Hannah tripped carrying firewood. Timothy fell into the stock pond. Twice. Good grief. Jed exclaimed, hauling the soaked child out for the second time. Is this young'un made of magnets for trouble? Timothy coughed water and pointed at the ducks. I just wanted to pet him. Luke bit the inside of his cheek trying not to laugh. Even Martha, despite the stress, had to turn away to hide a smile. Jed threw his hands up. Boss, this ain't a schoolhouse. Luke clapped the foreman's shoulder. Then maybe we're meant to become one. Jed grumbled something about miracles and chaos in petticoats, but even he couldn't stay sour long, not with 9 lively souls running about like sunbeams scattered across snow. The quiet weight Martha carried. That afternoon, as the children played near the barn under Eli's watch, Martha slipped into the kitchen to prepare lunch. Biscuits, beans, salted pork. Her hands moved quickly, but her thoughts churned. These chores. The spilled milk. The runaway chickens. Timothy soaking wet again. All of it reminded her of the same fear. We are a burden. She paused, gripping the counter until her knuckles whitened. Her late husband, Henry, used to tell her she carried the world with grace. But since his death, the world had grown too heavy. She didn't want to weigh down another man. Not Luke. Not anyone. She sighed and whispered, Lord, help me do right. Luke finds her. Luke pushed open the kitchen door, bringing in a whiff of hay and cold air. Martha? You all right? She straightened, forcing a smile. Yes, I'm fine. Just working. But Luke wasn't fooled. You look like you're holding up the roof with your shoulders. That's how motherhood feels sometimes, she said lightly. He stepped further into the room. Your kids, they're good. They're kind. They work hard. They make mistakes, Martha murmured. So do grown men, Luke said. I nearly crushed my foot this morning. Dropped a crate like a fool. Despite herself, Martha laughed softly. You? I don't believe it. It's true. Ask Jed, he hasn't stopped snickering. Her smile faded, replaced by a shadow of worry. Mr. McAllister. Luke, it really is too much. I know it. 9 children, no town wants us. No boarding house wants us. No employer wants us. I don't want you to regret opening your door. Luke leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying her with quiet intensity. Martha, he said gently, since y'all arrived this ranch hasn't felt empty. It's felt right. Her breath hitched. He continued, voice low and sincere. You've brought life back into this place. She swallowed. But there's so much trouble, so much noise. There's laughter too, Luke said. And purpose. And warmth. I haven't had that in years. The room fell quiet, except for the crackling of the stove and the faint sound of children's laughter drifting through the window. Then he said something that made Martha's knees weaken. This ranch feels more like home with you here than it ever has with me alone. Her eyes glistened. She turned slightly so he wouldn't see her cry. Luke let her have the moment, saying nothing more. But he stayed close, just close enough that she knew she wasn't alone, not even in her fears. A tender shift. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the kitchen window, Luke carried in fresh firewood. Martha reached for a log at the same time. Their fingers brushed. She froze. He did too. Not in embarrassment, but in recognition. Something tender and unspoken passed between them. Martha quickly drew her hand back, heart fluttering. Luke didn't push or tease. Instead he simply said, "Storm's coming tonight. But you're safe here. All of you." Martha nodded, unable to speak. Because for the first time in a long, lonely year, she believed him. Snow lay soft on the eaves the night Clara took to kneeling by her small pallet in the loft. The loft smelled of hay and warmed wool. The lantern's glow painted the rafters gold. Outside the wind complained along the roofline, but inside the double a hush had settled, one born of bellies full and hearts fuller still. Clara folded her small hands, whispering the prayer she had learned from Hannah when the family rode the train and nights felt the coldest. "Lord," she prayed, voice barely above the whisper of the lantern, "Mama needs a friend. Maybe even someone who'll be a papa to us again. But only if he loves all of us." That was the honest part. Clara did not want a stranger who would warm a single chair in the kitchen and then call it a life. She wanted someone who'd laugh at mornings, who'd teach Eli to shoe a horse, who'd let Jonah and Samuel pull a stubborn fence post and then clap when they got it right. She wanted a man whose hands could mend a roof and whose heart could hold 9 children and their mama. She didn't know then that Luke had stood by the barn doorway when he heard her small voice. He listened without stepping in. Listening had become his way of learning. When Clara finished and slipped into sleep, Luke lingered in the cold air a moment longer, thinking of his own empty nights before the Ellisons. The days that followed were small happenings strung into a new life. Luke built a makeshift shelf so Hannah could keep her Bible and school slates. He taught Eli how to check a fence line for weak posts and showed Jonah and Samuel how to put a proper hitch on a rope. The older boys worked with a fierce pride, earning nods from Jed that were almost smiles. Ruth learned to catch chickens without snapping the wing. Timothy, now dry and grinning, helped carry corn in a grain sack too big for his frame, and Lucy braided Clara's hair while humming old hymns. Martha watched them all with a cautious, grateful heart. The worry was still a constant thrum beneath the surface. Money, seasons, whether the neighbors would accept them, but in the mornings when steam rose from a pot of coffee and children's voices met the sunrise, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in months: relief. One afternoon, as Martha hung laundry on a bitterly cold but bright day, Luke came out with 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. His hands were calloused from work. His eyes were steady. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said simply. She laughed, half a startled breath, half a release. "You bear enough, Mr. McAllister. Your ranch takes a lot." He shook his head. "This place needed life. You all brought it. You've been doing more for me than I can pay." Martha looked down at the steaming mug, then up at Luke. She surprised herself by asking, in a voice frayed by years and stitched with hope, "Do you really mean that?" "All of us." He set his other hand on the line post, casual, steady, and nodded. "Good land takes a lot and good people do too," he said. "I never had kin around. I suppose I'd forgotten how loud a home should be. I'd like it to be loud." It was not poetry, but it was truth, and truth dug into Martha's bones. She felt the old armor around her heart loosen just a fraction. That evening, as the children fell asleep under quilts Luke had mended, Clara crept to the stair and watched Luke bring a stack of wood to the stove. He looked tired in that honest, earned way. He looked like a man who had made a decision he would keep. Clara slipped back into her pallet smiling. Her prayer had not been extravagant, only that someone might love her mother and the 9 children as they were. The answer felt like warm bread in a filled kettle. Small, steady, and enough. Spring was only a rumor across the prairie, but trouble came on a warmer wind. The first the family knew of it was the approach of a hired wagon, dust stirring the lane even though the road was still rutted with winter. Grant Baylor was a man of means and gray suits, known in the county for buying up neighboring ranches when cattle prices were high and selling the land later at a tidy profit. He'd been watching Double M for months. Luke had seen his drovers at the market and felt the cold calculus of a man who counted acres by ledger. Baylor slowed by the corral, dismounting as if the place were an inconvenience he had to endure. His eyes moved over the children, measuring them with the same clinical look he gave cattle, assessing, deciding. "McAllister," he said with the smooth edge of someone used to having the last word, "I've been meaning to speak with you about the Double M. With the spring roundup coming, I think it's in both our interests you consider selling. A man like me can turn a property profitable." Luke's reply was quiet. "This ain't for sale." Baylor smirked, and glanced at Martha and the children with the contempt of a man who believes prosperity and charity are incompatible. "You've taken on a woman with 9 children, McAllister," he went on. "That will eat into your margins. A rancher can't afford moral obligations." The words cut through the yard like a whip. Clara, standing close to Martha, tightened her grip on her mother's skirt. Eli's jaw set. Jonah and Samuel exchanged a look. They had learned to read trouble in men's faces. Martha stepped forward before Luke could. That had been instinct more than courage. "They're not obligations," she said, voice small but clear. "They're my children." Baylor's laugh was short. "A woman with that many mouths is bad business. You'd be doing him a favor if you took yourself and your brood in." Luke's hand went to the rail beside him. Jed, who had been watching from the barn, moved closer, shoulders squared. "Say one more word," Luke said, slow and dangerous, "and you're talking to the end of my patience." Baylor, for all his money, had never been the sort of man to back down from a show of force. He raised an eyebrow. "You threaten me, McAllister?" "I protect my people," Luke replied. "You insult them again, I'll make sure no buyer in the county trusts you when they learn how you conduct yourself." For a heartbeat the world seemed to hold its breath, the cattle shuffling, the children frozen, the spring wind quiet. Baylor's smirk thinned. "You'll be sorry you meddled, McAllister." He turned, swaggering toward his wagon like a man who expected the world to follow him. As his horse trotted away, Eli, who had controlled his anger until now, voiced what the family felt. "My mama ain't a burden," he called after the retreating man. "She's our ma. We're her family." Baylor jerked the reins, but his horse passed that shot back with a snort. He rode off, but the shadow of his words followed, less a threat of immediate violence than the looming pressure of economic games. Offers to buy cheap, rumors to undercut value, neighbors coaxed into selling out. That evening, the family gathered in the kitchen under the warm lamp. Luke closed the door and leaned his back against it, breathing out with the kind of tiredness that arrives after standing guard. "You did right," Martha said simply, stepping to his side. "Thank you." He took her hand for a moment. "I couldn't let him speak of you like that. Not in front of your children." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time there was no armor between them at all. "You keep protecting us, Luke, and we'll keep repaying you with what we can." Jed, who normally kept his counsel to himself, grunted approval. "They work hard. They'll help mend fences and watch calves. Folks who aren't quick to fold under a hard season are worth more than any coin." The threat of Grant Baylor remained, an ugly shadow on the horizon, but inside the Double M something steadied. A united front, children who felt a man would stand with them, and a woman who was learning that receiving help didn't make her less worthy of love. Luke squeezed Martha's hand once, a small vow in a simple gesture. Outside, the ranch slept under a sky the color of iron, but inside, the Ellisons slept closer together than they had in months, protected, chosen, and oddly hopeful. Spring finally came to the Double M ranch like a slow, steady blessing. Snowmelt fed the creek, the meadow turned soft green around the edges, and calves bleated in the pastures, reminding everyone that life insisted on beginning again, even after the hardest winters. Luke stood at the gate of the corral early one morning, resting his arms on the top rail as the sun crept over the horizon. His breath formed small clouds, but the air held a gentleness that promised warmer days. Behind him, the ranch house glowed with lamplight as Martha and the older girls started breakfast, and the boys fed the horses and checked the troughs. It was a sight Luke had grown accustomed to, one that filled him with a quiet joy he hadn't known he was missing. He no longer woke to stillness. He woke to a home. He wasn't ready to lose it. And Baylor's threat still lingered like a storm at the edge of the prairie. Jed Carter appeared beside him, rubbing his hands together. "You're thinking hard for a man who hasn't had his coffee." Luke huffed a laugh. "I'm thinking about keeping this ranch safe." Jed eyed him. "And about keeping that family inside this house permanently, I reckon." Luke didn't answer. He didn't need to. The news that changed everything. Later that morning, as the family sat around the long table, biscuits steaming, sausage sizzling, and the youngest children laughing over spilled milk, a hard knock sounded at the door. Lucy froze. Ruth reached for Martha's sleeve. Samuel and Jonah exchanged wary glances. Luke rose. Jed stood beside him. When the door opened, there stood neighbors, two ranchers Luke respected, Cole Dawson and Fenton Marsh. Men of solid character, the kind who rarely interfered in another man's business. "Luke," Dawson began, removing his hat, "Baylor's been offerin' folks money to speak out against you at the county meeting next month. Claims you're letting your property go soft talking in a big family." Marsh snorted. "Man's a fool. Your ranch looks better'n ever. But the point is," Dawson added, "he's stirring trouble. Folks warned us. Thought we should warn you." Luke nodded once, jaw tight. "I appreciate it." Both men glanced inside, saw Martha holding Clara, saw the children gathered close. And something softened in their faces. Dawson tipped his hat gently. "Miss Ellison, you and your young'uns are a sight this place needed." Marsh agreed with a grunt. "Don't let that money hound scare you off. We ain't all blind." They left with a final nod, their horses kicking up dust on the road. When the door shut, silence settled heavy in the room. Martha turned to Luke. "What does this mean?" Luke looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had survived rejection, hunger, fear, 9 births, and a world that believed she was too much to carry. "Martha," he said quietly, "Baylor's not trying to buy my land. He's trying to tear apart what we've built." "And what have we built, Luke?" she asked softly. He took a deep breath. "Something worth fighting for. A family chooses each other." That evening Luke called everyone outside. The stars were sharp and bright, scattered across a deep blue sky. A small fire crackled before the porch where the children huddled in quilts. Luke stood in front of them, heart pounding harder than it ever had in any cattle stampede. "I won't pretend we haven't faced pressure," he began. "A man like Baylor thinks a family is a weight. Thinks you, every one of you, are some kind of liability." Eli bristled. Timothy clutched Ruth's hand. Clara pressed against Martha's side. "But he's wrong," Luke continued. "You've done more for this ranch than any hired crew I've brought on. You've worked with me, prayed with me, shared your joys and storms with me. And I—" He swallowed hard. Every child watched him. Martha, too, eyes bright, breath caught, waiting as though the world were about to tilt. "I don't want this ranch without you," Luke said, voice unsteady but true. "Not for a day. Not for a season. Not for a year. I want you here. I want all of you here." He stepped closer to Martha. "And I want you, Martha Ellison. I've never met a woman with more grit, more faith, or more love in her than you. I know your heart's been broken, and I know your hands are tired. But if you'll have me—" He kneeled. The children gasped. Clara covered her mouth. "Martha, I want to marry you. And if you'll say yes, I'll spend my life taking care of all 9 of your children, and any you and I might have later if the Lord blesses us. I want to be their father. Not just a protector. Not a temporary hand. A true father." Tears slipped down Martha's cheeks, slow, unstoppable. "Luke," she whispered, "are you sure? 9 children, that's a lot to choose." He took her trembling hand. "They're not a burden. They're a blessing. And I want every single one." Martha covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The children waited, breathless. Clara whispered, "Mama, say yes." And Martha finally did. "Yes, Luke. Yes, I'll marry you." A cheer erupted, wild, joyful, childlike. Jonah and Samuel whooped. Eli stood tall with pride. Hannah cried. Lucy hugged Ruth, who cried too. Timothy laughed. Clara threw her arms around Luke's neck the moment he stood. Luke wrapped Martha into his arms, lifting her slightly as the stars spun overhead. The promise of a new life. The next Sunday, the tiny church on Sagebrush Road overflowed with neighbors. Baylor's attempts to stir trouble evaporated the moment folks learned Luke and Martha were to be wed. People saw the truth. This wasn't a burden. This was a blessing. This was the making of a family. Pastor Wright's voice shook with warmth as he joined their hands. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The children cheered so loudly the rafters shook. Luke lifted Martha's hand and kissed it gently. "Martha McAllister," he murmured. "Welcome home." And as they walked out into the bright Wyoming morning, 9 children surrounding them like a shield, Martha realized something astonishing. For the first time in her life she felt chosen. Not tolerated. Not pitied. But wanted, truly wanted. Her children too. Luke smiled at all of them, his voice steady and full as he spoke the words that began their new life. Let's go home, all of us.